Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us here tonight at the Library of Congress. My name is Kevin Butterfield. I'm the director of the John W. Kluge Center here at the library. The Kluge Center was founded 25 years ago this year, and with a large philanthropic gift to the library to create a center for scholars to come into residence, to conduct research in the library's vast, unparalleled collections. Also, to have opportunities to host thoughtful conversations, programs for Congress, for their staff, for the American people, of the sort we have here this evening. We had the privilege of hosting Martha Jones as a distinguished visiting scholar in residence as she wrote and researched. Now we're very pleased to have her come here to talk about her book, The Trouble of Color. Martha Jones is a remarkable historian known for such books as Birthright Citizens, A History of Race and Rights in Antebellum America, Vanguard, How Black Women Broke Barriers, Won the Vote, and Insisted on Equality for All. She's based at Johns Hopkins University, where she's the Society of Black Alumni Presidential Professor, Professor of History, and the professor at the SNF Agra Institute. She also, this is very important, is a member of the Scholars Council here at the library, which advises the Kluge Center, and more importantly, advises the Librarian of Congress on all kinds of matters related to research and scholarship. We turn to them regularly for their guidance. We're lucky to have her in those rooms. We're lucky to have her here tonight. In conversation with Martha Jones will be Michelle Norris. Michelle Norris was the host of NPR's All Things Considered for about 10 years, also the author of the 2024 book, Our Hidden Conversation, What Americans Really Think About Race and Identity. Please join me in welcoming Martha Jones and Michelle Norris.
Thank you all for braving the blustery cold weather to come out and be with us today. I am so thrilled to be here with someone who I consider a dear friend and a mentor. I am not in any way suggesting that Kevin's introduction was incomplete, but there are a few other things that you should know about her. She is an incredible mentor. She is always collecting people. She is one of the people who, if you're climbing up a hill that is particularly steep in terms of scholarship or research, she's the kind of person who will call you and tap you on the shoulder and whisper, "Keep going." She is the kind of person that people say the most wonderful things about her when she's not in the room. And because she's in the room now, I just want to say that with an audience to witness this, just how much we appreciate not just your scholarship, but your heart and your mentorship and the way that you have been an angel for so many of us, myself included. So thank you for indulging me to allow me to start with that. And every so often, a scholar walks this earth at the right moment. And Martha is doing the right work at the right moment. And we've seen this in her previous books and now with this memoir, which is so beautiful and will be for sale in the back of the room. And we're going to have a full and yeasty conversation. And I want you to begin with the title, because The Trouble of Color is a phrase that explains American history. It explains the contours of your life. It explains the things that we sometimes have a difficult time talking about in our country. Why did you settle on this title, and what do you want people to take from it, even before they dive into the pages of the book?
So thank you for the question, but before I answer it, I'm just going to come right back at you. Because what Kevin didn't get to mention, of course, is that in addition to Our Hidden Conversations, your most recent book, we met when you were traveling with your memoir, The Grace of Silence. And I remember watching Michelle, as she does so often, stand on a stage in a room full of thousands of people with open microphones and invite them to come to the microphone and speak their minds, their hearts, their souls about race. I watched her do this and I was terrified for her. An open mic is a thing, right? I mean, that is an opportunity. And I watched you do it, and then I asked you, how do you do it? And what you said to me was, I wrote a memoir. and I told my story. And that gave me a kind of courage, right? I had said it all, is what you said to me. And so what could someone say, right, that I didn't already know, that I hadn't already heard? And I never forgot that. And so this book is very much not only inspired by, I think, really standing on that foundation. But everybody has their own story, right?
Do you remember, we'll get to the book in a minute, but do you remember going to dinner that night? I remember we were walking and you said, I have so many questions and I don't know how to ask them. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
You know, because you said that people, and we'll talk about this because it happens in the book, that people, Martha, you are, if we're honest, racially ambiguous. And you said that people, and sometimes it's fun because you know that people are kind of, is she, let me hear her talk.
Where are you from?
Where's it from? Is it humid? Let me see what happens to her hair. You know, and they're doing this, but you said you have so many questions, but you weren't sure how to get answers. You found the courage to go out, and boy, did you find the answers. Yeah. As a historian, as a scholar, you dug deep. So let's begin with the title. Why did you choose this title?
Trouble, right? The trouble. And yes, the trouble in the title, I think the line from the book is the color of trouble, too much or too little of it, depending on who you ask. Which is to say, it is my way of capturing what it is like to live in an ambiguous body in the 20th and 21st century United States. And the ways in which the trouble is sometimes how other people read me, but it is also in those moments when I struggle with how to read myself. But there's another part to the meaning of trouble in the book, and perhaps it's a more optimistic one. And because I open the book with the words from a spiritual, wade in the water. Folks may know it, wade in the water, children. God's going to trouble the water. So that comes from the book of John. And in the book of John, the angels trouble the waters. And we step into the waters. And when we step into the troubled waters, we are healed. We are made well. And so for me, trouble has that double meaning, because when I was finally willing to step into the troubled waters of my own life, the troubled waters of the generations before me, I was changed by writing this book. And so, and it's important to say that there is underneath this a kind of optimism, a sense of possibility, of the good that comes to us when we confront our own histories, when we confront our own lives and the lives of the people we've loved, that maybe we are healed in a different kind of way.
I'm just going to echo what you just said, because we're sitting in a building where we explore history, but we're also sitting in a moment in America where we will make decisions that will choose our future, you know, in not just how we vote and the cars we drive and the food that we eat and the decisions that we make, but we're also living in a moment where people think that we can also choose our past. And so for you to say that, it's important that the benefit that we get when we look into our history. I want to create a conversation that's sort of a double helix around two of the characters in the book. The bishop and Nancy Graves. But before we get there, because that's reaching back in the family tree, can we go to some of the lower branches and sort of begin with a little bit more about your family? Can you tell us about your mom and your dad, and in doing so, give us just a little bit of a geographic map and the importance of some of the places, particularly North Carolina and Bennett College?
Right. And place matters in this story, as it does for a lot of our families. We don't exist we don't float right above the geographies of our lives. My mother is the child of German and Irish immigrants to the United States at the end of the 19th century, born in Buffalo, New York.
And her name?
Sue Jones. And Sue is born, into a world of steel, of prisons. She was a working class Catholic girl on the east side of Buffalo for whom, working in an office instead of a factory was mobility. She runs away to New York City, dreams of a different kind of life, and there she meets my father, who is also on his own kind of journey. Born in Greensboro, North Carolina, the son of a college president, the president of an HBCU, today's Bennett College, raised on a campus, a child of the talented 10th, who along the way has his own troubles. And it's 1956, 5 or 6 when they meet. Well, you know what that time was like. Civil rights was an idea. It was a promise. It was becoming manifest, right, in our courts, in our schools, in our culture. But they met and aimed to marry at a time where it was still illegal in his home state of North Carolina, as well as, I think, 16 or 17 other states still. And I am the child of that.
And growing up, you and your siblings were always confounding people. And you write about that. And you write about how that created, I remember one of the things you also told me that that people believe that race is something, the phrase you use, and I use it often, that we live inside boxes of fixed certitude. I just love that image. But we don't. You sometimes are one thing in one place and something else in in another place, and people will sometimes place you someplace else. And you write about feeling like you were always being sort of moved about, again, because of the ambiguity.
I think as a young person, I experienced certainly my share, maybe a little bit more of my share of what goes on in lots of schoolyards, right? We're eager, right, to pick on other kids for what they are, for what they aren't, for how they appear, how you think they should appear. And so I had my fair share and then of some of that. But of course that was coupled with our move to the suburbs of New York City, a white enclave where we really stood out, and where my parents initially were pariahs, where there were yards I couldn't go into. And I say that to say, in some sense, I had no doubt about who I was, right? The world seemed pretty clear about where the lines were drawn, that we were out of bounds as a family. And yet, when you leave the confines of the known world, right? That's Edward Jones, right? The known world,
Right here from DC.
Folks have questions, and they're eager to ask them in ways that are curious and not so kind all the time.
But people had questions at home too, even in your family, and that's why I want to do this double helix conversation, because your families were collectors, and you wound up becoming, every generation has that person who collects the stories, who maintains the pictures, who does the oral history, and that baton seems to have been passed to you. But as a scholar, you wound up going a lot deeper than other family members. Before you started writing this book, how much did you know about your family history?
It's a great question, because I have to really take myself back. Mm-hmm. I'd say, in some sense, I'm like, my family was like a lot of families. We told 6 or 7 stories, and we told them over and over and over again, right? And and then I probably knew a little more because I was always at work building this family tree. But family trees are oftentimes built on the kinds of records. If any of you have ever done family research, you've looked at a census return, you've looked at death certificates or birth certificates. You know, those are odd kinds of stories that don't, certainly don't always comport with the stories we inherit in family. But part of what I learned is that the men, and they were mostly men, who created those documents were in ways just storytellers too,
Yeah.
right? And so I'm really wrestling, even before I get to the book, with how to reconcile the varying and competing stories and whose stories are going to become my stories.
I want to spend a little bit of time with that eventually also, because there's the storytellers that you learn a lot from, and there's the documents. And sometimes one is more reliable than the other. And then there's also the census, and how the census is such a fuzzy document. I mean, sometimes questions weren't asked. People would show up and they would decide what color you were, and that's what would get written down, and which would create mysteries and inaccuracies in itself. But let's begin with Nancy Belgraves, because you have this beautiful picture of her, and you'll see the book is filled with lots of pictures, including pictures of a very young Martha Jones, who looks remarkably like the Martha Jones sitting next to me right now. Almost the
my
same
friend.
haircut, actually. But there's this wonderful picture of her. Nancy, if I may call her, because I was raised a certain way, I almost want to call her Miss Graves, is sitting, and she's regal. She is regal, and she has a book which almost, it doesn't feel like it was a prop. Like it was important to let you know that she was, she had aspiration, she had lived a life. And this picture, this photograph, was of great importance to you and your family, and it almost was like the cornerstone, the foundation stone for the work that you began doing. Tell us about that and about her and what you learned.
I'm sorting through family photos on a sunny afternoon, and spread them out on the coffee table. I'm going to photograph them to make sure they're preserved somehow. And it's clear that Nancy is the farthest back, right, ancestor, right, among these images. And she is, as you say, regal, but in a 19th century way, right? She's got a bonnet and a scarf and a very plain but tailored cotton dress. And I realized I know her name, and I almost know nothing else about her. I flip over the cabinet card. It's a large-scale photo, and I recognize my Aunt Tuppy's handwriting. She says, Nancy Graves lived in Danville, Kentucky, which is where she was born and where she died, had 7 boys and 7 girls. That's all I've got. That's all I've got. But
Wait, 7 boys and 7 girls?
yeah, just pause for that for a minute. Yeah. Born in 1808, enslaved, lives until the 1880s, long enough to see her children and her grandchildren as free and thriving people there in Danville. But as I show friends the photo, as I do, they keep saying to me, the thing sometimes, they keep saying, you look just like her. You look just like her. And I don't see it at first. And they say things like, it's the eyes, you know? And I think, I don't know. I don't see it. But I spend enough time with the photo, and I actually hang it on the wall. And what comes to really strike me is the color of her skin. And I ask myself, how is it that my great-great-great-grandmother, born in 1808, has my complexion? Or how is it that I have her complexion? And what is the story there? How do we get from her? I'm born in 1958, so it's literally a century and a half. That's not the story that I've been told in my family about how I look the way I do. I had always been told it was about my own parents.
That's not a story that we've been told in America, because if you look at many of the African Americans who live in America, they no longer look like the mother continent. And it's not like we faded. You know, there was stuff that happened that we don't talk about.
So I have to begin to try and, discover Nancy's world, to discover Nancy's life. I start with some of these family stories. I add some of these, quote unquote, official documents. But the place I'm most reluctant to go is the place I know I have to go. Because Nancy is claimed as property by a man in Danville who was a professor and later on the president of a local college. And his papers are lovingly preserved in the college archives. And I know they're there. It takes me 10 years to work up I don't know, is it the courage? Is it the nerve? And it's the last box, and the last ledger in the last box. And there I realize this man has documented, after slavery is over, every dime he loaned her, every cent he paid her in a wage, and not only her, but the members of her family. And it is at the same time like, someone turns on the lights and you can see things that you'd never seen, and yet it is also chilling because I am now, what am I, indebted to? Grateful to. I think in the book I say something like, he did me a favor because he wrote it all down. But I have to use that stuff carefully so that I'm not falling into the trap, right, of taking his story at face value, like I don't take the census at face value, and reading between the lines, looking for Nancy. But can I say that when I do, what I discover is that my great-great-great-grandmother, who I had always seen as, in a sense, without family, she marries and has children, but without an extended family. There on the pages of his ledger are her sisters, Betty and Tina, and I am floored, and I am indebted to him because it is only by his careful record keeping, his terrible record keeping, that I'm able to know them and then build out a new kind of story about her that's not about the slaveholding family at all. It's about Betty and Tina and their children and her children and the world they made.
And when I was reading this, because of the work I do, I think about how we tell a story. And I'm thinking about if I were doing this in film or in animation at that moment, I'm picturing tributaries, flowing out from the page, because these are additional family members. These are people, these are other stories. And I felt in reading this that was the moment that you were almost energized to keep going. That was the whisper, the ancestors talking to you. You have more work to do here.
Absolutely. So we're going to say that tonight, right? That I believe in the signs. I believe that after you've spent, I don't know if anybody else has ever done this, it's 3 a.m. and you've lost track of time and you're still going through the census returns for Danville, Kentucky, page by page, and you hit on and you think, I'm right where I'm supposed to be. Right, I'm right where I'm supposed to be, and I believe that there was something right and true about me being the person to surface that story out of those terrible records.
I tend to believe that history usually finds the right conservator, that it makes its way to the person who is going to keep it alive, who's going to keep it afloat, who's going to find new tributaries to help us understand things. And it makes me think also, Martha, of another conversation that we had around Frederick Douglass, because you were the person that, you told me that I should get a book, which I'm recommending in this room also. There will be a syllabus for all of you as we continue this conversation. But there was this wonderful picture book of all of the photos. Frederick Douglass was the most photographed. Do you remember this conversation we had? He was the most photographed man of color of his time. And he was a dandy, and he was, and photographs were like a thing at that point. It wasn't like just a selfie. I mean, it was like, you had to really go and spend a lot of money and find someone to do this. And he was photographed so much. And you said, get the book and understand what he was trying to say. Like he was speaking to the future in these photos. And it made me think when I was reading this book that Nancy Graves was speaking to the future also when she had that photo taken.
I mean, the way I think about it is, right, she bequeaths the photo, right? She bequeaths her image. She doesn't have material things, right? She doesn't have a bank account, but she makes her way to the photo studio in Danville, I'm sure with the in the company of her daughter Susan, who was really her companion later in life, and she bequeaths that. And it's a gift, it's a puzzle, right? It's a homework assignment for me. It's all those things. But yes, and there's a reason, right? The photograph survives, that it gets passed down, that some of these photos that I have, you can tell people have been handling them for a century and more, and not always so gently, if I could say, but they're still here. And in Nancy's case, there are multiple copies in this cache of photos I have, and someone went and had duplicates made so that they could be shared, and we could each have one. And mine is still on the wall in my office until today. She sits on my shoulder every day.
I love that.
Yeah.
She understood that that was currency. So the other side of this double helix, and there's a photo of the bishop, of Robert Jones, in the book as well. And he is also sending a message in the future in that photo also. He's looking off into the middle distance of history. He is a storied man. He is a man of power. I don't mean this he's a bit puffy in the way that he's posing for that picture. And in these two stories, they're your stories, but they're our stories also. These are individual stories, but there's something universal about the way that we think we know our family histories, and we often don't. And the way that some of it is a mystery, and some of it is a secret, because there's a massaging of the narrative. So some of it is actually hidden from view, and we have that in common. The first book I wrote was all about that. And so this is a case where you have someone who, his story is very well known. He's in the paper all the time. He's one of the best known people, particularly in the Black community. And yet there's a part of his story that you wind up uncovering. So the question is, how did you go about uncovering that? When you got close to it, how did you once again find the courage to keep going? And when you write memoir, it's a three-part story. Sorry, I'm a journalist, I tend to do this. When you write a memoir, you bring everybody else along for the ride in your family. So when you started to uncover these things, the third part of the question is, how did you prepare your family for what you were about to uncover and then share with the world?
Yeah. So you're right, the bishop, who really was a bishop, I should say, it's not just a nickname, he was a bishop in the Methodist Episcopal Church, is really the patriarch of my grandparents' generation. And that means that as he ages, he's very concerned about posterity. He wants to be remembered, but he wants to be remembered the way he wants to be remembered, as a man like that would be. And he tells his story to a historian journalist who publishes it in a book. And I grew up at that book. It's called The Negro Vanguard. It's here in the library's collection. For a long time, I thought it was gospel, right? I read it and I imbibed it, I believed it, it became part of me. And one of the things he tells us in that story is that we came from free people. We had never been enslaved. But it's a cousin of mine from California who combs through the papers of the Freedmen's Bureau. This is the federal agency that takes over for the Army and provides aid and support to former slaves after the war, after the Civil War. My cousin finds a complaint filed in 1867 by a woman named Isabella Holly. Well, Isabella Holly, I know that name because she's the bishop's grandmother. But this Isabella Holly tells a story about after the war, leaving a plantation in eastern North Carolina, her 4 surviving children in tow, settling there, quite near destitute because the man who had fathered her children had reneged on a bargain. He was not supporting them as he had promised. What's the catch? Well, that man was the man who called her property, right? That she had been enslaved and borne the children of her enslaver. So this story, the bishop never told, at least never told in print. And I think I worried, I worried that I was betraying him if I told Isabella's story. I wondered if I was wrong and I was stepping out of bounds. We don't air our family laundry. We keep our family secrets. But then there was Isabella, right? Who, after all she had endured, she had been acquired by this man at 14 years old, born 9 children, 4 of whom survived, and had the courage to face federal officials and complain about that man. I thought if Isabella could tell the story, maybe I should too. And that part of what, if the bishop were here, I would want to say to him is that I think I understand that he came of age and made his career in a time when we still had deep ambivalences, perhaps some of us, about what it meant to not only be descended from enslaved people, but be descended from histories of sexual violence. Perhaps that's not only a 19th century thing. But I wanted to tell him that I sit in the 21st century where we can not only tell the story of Isabella and the tragically countless women like Isabella, we honor them, we admire them, we revere them precisely because they endured and they survived and they thrived. It's why we're here. And I wanted him to know that in a way, that I don't want to say it gets better exactly, but it changes, and our ability to tell family stories change. And this is a key to me in this book, is I'm not in this book to argue with him or to correct him. I want to understand why he told the stories that he did. And then I want to tell him about the stories that I'm able to tell, and that those stories are both true in a family sense. They are just stories of their own time.
And it's possible that he didn't know. It's possible that he didn't know because for a lot of people moving forward, they only looked forward. And the analogy for anybody in this room who's ever run track, you're told don't look sideways, don't look right, don't look left, certainly don't look backward, just go forward. So it's possible that he had a vacuum, and in that vacuum, he filled it with a story that allowed him to thrive.
I was always struck by, in his story, he refers to the father of Isabella's children as his grandfather. And this is another dimension of telling these multi-generational stories. I don't think I could regard that man as kin to me. I would never claim him as my great-great-grandfather, even as I understand he was the father of my great-great-grandmother's children.
But isn't that complicated?
Yeah, absolutely.
On the family tree, it is what it is.
It is what it is. I agree. But I came to regard, monikers like grandfather or sister as honorifics in a way, and that we don't bestow those terms on everyone with whom we might have a we say a biological relationship, right? And so to me, grandfather is an honorific.
Yeah.
And that's me, right? And
Family is a title, but it's also a verb.
Yeah.
And you write with so much grace. And this is an historic memoir, but it's very, very personal. And I'm sorry if this question seems a little woo-woo in the asking, but you often have to, you're describing, you say, I imagine what it was like, when she's sitting with her children and wondering how they're going to find their next meal. You're painting a picture, and part of that is based on the deep, muscular research that you did. But I also wonder if people started, and this is again, sorry if it sounds woo-woo, but started talking to you. When you get deep in this kind of research, you start having conversations. They're almost apparitions. You can see them. You can, and I interviewed Rachel Swarns, who wrote a wonderful book about the 272 about the people who were enslaved by the Jesuits who ran Georgetown, and she said that she really had a hard time sleeping after a while because she was having almost like fever dreams, and she was feeling like I was wondering if you entered a space like that.
I think for me, my version of that were scenes, right? That I became to think that I could not just more than imagine, right? That I could actually conjure up scenes, places. My great-grandmother's front porch, right? The two-room shack where my great-grandparents raised their children. And you're aided a little bit by maps and by photographs and by descriptions. But because when we write books, as you know, folks are reading the final version, but there were many, many drafts. And so there's a way in which you visited and revisited these places, not only in your mind, but then on the page. But this is, for me, becomes important because I'm trying to move away with a deliberateness from the kind of constraint or restraint that I exercise as a historian. As a historian, if I don't have a footnote, I'm probably not going to say it. And here, well, it's important to say there are no footnotes. But that is just a shorthand way of really pointing to how I wanted to write in a genre that would let me take you into my imaginations, my fears, my dreams for people that were not realized, and even, my, kind of fragmentary speculations, and beyond history as a genre, I can do all that. And that's, of course, how I become not just a dutiful chronicler of the past, and I become a character in the book.
Yeah, and in the end, you actually are a character in the book. There's this wonderful moment that you describe where you go back to Bennett. You get there, you stay at a hotel, you find, I think, a flyer for a great Italian restaurant. You go and you order a steaming bowl of, was it fettuccine Alfredo?
Yeah. Still one of my favorites.
And a waitress comes up to you and asks you an interesting question.
I'm really proud of myself in that moment because I've traveled back to North Carolina. My grandmother is gone. I really have no near kin. I'm alone, and I have kind of battled my, not demons, but my fears about traveling alone in the South, about being an ambiguous person who sometimes leads to, causes discomfort to others. But I've arrived now in Greensboro, which I consider a second home, and I take myself out to dinner. And I'm sitting there, and the waitress comes up to me as I'm like, fork.
But
the mouth.
there's an important element. You're reading a book.
And I'm reading Alice Walker, Possessing the Secret of Joy. Because I'm trying to give folks a clue, right? That's true. And the waitress stops at my shoulder and says, "Can I ask you a question?" And I'm thinking, uh-oh. And she says, "What race are you?" And all the alarm bells go off. I'm sure that I'm about to
The
be...
writing is so good at this point. She says, am I hearing someone say danger, or is this in my head?
Danger, Will Robinson. I'm dating myself, for those of you who remember Will Robinson and his robot. But really, the alarms go off, my heart, and it's so intense that, yes, I recall realizing that she was curious. She was really a curious young person, didn't mean any harm, but I cannot remember what I said.
That's what was the amazing thing about it. Afterwards,
Cannot.
I was thinking, okay, what did she thought about this? And then you said, I don't remember what I said.
I think it's almost
Which
like
is so honest, right?
It's almost like a little PTSD thing. I don't mean to trivialize PTSD, but I do think that there are a number of moments in the book where I can't recall what I said because my adrenaline is going, and I think we all know that feeling. The fight or flight, reflex, and I can't remember what I said. I know I said something. And I know she went away. Yeah. So it was sort of okay.
But this is not a case where, to be clear, this is not a case of shame or, inability. It feels like you are carrying the weight of not just your family's history, but American history. And that's what seems to be the weight on your heart as you're going through this.
I mean, I think that's right. And that every time I hear a version of that question, I think the answer is very long and very complex, right? As is the story of this nation, race in this nation, family in this nation. This is not something you can capture in a quick retort to the waitress in a busy Italian restaurant on a Thursday night, right? What would I do? Invite her to sit down and we can really talk it through. So I think in some ways I always know that, right? That we have questions, right? We all have questions about who we are and the people we come from and what it means for ourselves, for our communities, for our country, what makes us one, but to really talk about that, for me, requires, 275 pages, and a lot of research. But for me, that's the right answer. That's the right kind of answer. You do this work by asking people to give you 6 words, and only 6 words. And when we worked on that project together at the University of Michigan, I'll just never forget, first of all, the hundreds of cards that we collected, but the way in which it is also true that people can, in 6 carefully crafted words, capture so much complexity. It's remarkable. I'm not one of those people.
Yeah, well, it underscores the fact that people do want to tell their stories, that people are naturally curious. And you said you have questions. We as a community have questions. We have questions in this room, and I want to make sure that we have time to take some of those questions. And I think what happens when you tell a story like this is that you give permission for people to be even more curious, to be curious with a greater depth, because it's really anthropology. I mean, when you think about Zora Neale Hurston, we know her as a novelist, but she was an anthropologist, and she would travel throughout Florida, and she would gather stories from one town, and she would go to the next town, and she would tell the stories from the previous town, and that's how she got people to open up in the next town. And so when you tell these stories, you give permission for people to be more introspective and to perhaps share their stories. And perhaps this evening people have stories or questions that they would like to share and maybe learn a little bit about your journey and your research.
Yeah, I'd love that.
I think that are there mics that can be passed? While we're thinking if anyone, great, we have a question right here in the front row.
Thank you for this wonderful conversation. I just wondered if you have siblings or cousins and if they see their identity the way you see yours, and if you discuss that.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll say that last night I was in a conversation, not unlike this one, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I had 10 cousins and my baby brother, who's not a baby any longer, in the room. And they are simultaneously my toughest audience because they know all my tender spots. And my tender spots are their tender spots. And so I couldn't look at them last night, or I don't think I could have finished the conversation on the one hand. And on the other hand, you're right, that we are all positioned to various degrees differently, right, in this family story. I'm probably in the middle of the cousins age-wise. Some of us are from New York, some of it, all the things. And so I consider myself very fortunate because generally and largely my family has shares, I think, my premise. And the premise is that perhaps none of our stories are precisely the same. And that is a kind of truth about family. And that we don't show up to correct one another or to gotcha one another. You tell me your version of that scene or that person or that memory or that piece of lore, and we pull them all together, and they're part of the tapestry, I think, of a family. But it took me time to understand that, and it really took sitting with some of the characters in this book to appreciate that I hadn't come to condemn them or correct them or to be the smart aleck historian, right, who can lay on the table, the will or the death certificate. Why? I'm not sure why you'd come to family for that, because, of course, for me, this is a healing and a love letter to generations, and I hope that my cousins and my siblings feel some of that too.
Is there a question on this side of the room? Right here. While they're handing the mic, could you just say a word about the greater family, the family of man and women, of men and women who are reaching out to you and saying thank you for writing this book, and what the photographer said to you yesterday?
Yeah, I was saying to Michelle that, I had told small parts of this story. In fact, 10 years ago, I wrote an essay for CNN. It's called Biracial and Also Black. I did not write the headline, but you get the gist. And it went viral. It had more than 8 million hits. And I didn't understand it, and I wasn't sure I wanted it. That was a lot. That was just a lot of people, right, coming to me, right, and with their own stories. But now I think that the book helped me to accept that and to maybe find my own place in our bigger family. So I did a television taping yesterday, and as I was leaving the studio, a young man, my complexion more or less, freckles, a soft fro, clearly, I think he had been a camera person during the shoot, stopped me and he said, thank you for your story. I don't have your courage, right? And what can I say? What I said to him is, I see you. I want you to know that I see you, and I don't know everything about you, but I know enough about you that we share, right? Not only the stories and the history, but I felt how moved he was, right? And that's really the thing that you taught me, right, is how to stand in front of people and allow people to share what moves them, to be moved by them, and to understand that that's one of the gifts of being human, is discovering that capacity. So I'm still learning, there's no doubt, but following your model, I'm not sure I'm going to stand in front of 3,000 people with an open mic, but maybe.
Yeah,
right?
but you're an important step on his journey, because he found the courage to say that to you, and you didn't have the courage to do what you did 10 years ago. So let's see where he goes. We have a question here.
So my question is, how has this process of writing memoir going to change how you write history? Are you going to see your work as a historian differently now?
Were you sent here by my editor? Because he would like to know the answer to that.
I'm a historian too.
Thank you for that. I think I should say that my history department chair is also here, my wonderful chair. I'm sure she might be curious too. So part of what's interesting about this moment and this book is that I'm actually writing alongside, including my department chair, historians who are writing out of their family archives. The great David Levering Lewis, a Pulitzer Prize-winning biographer of W.B. Du Bois, last month released a memoir called The Stained Glass Window, which I highly recommend, which is a narrative retelling of his own family story. And so part of what in the writing I benefited from were historians who were fellow travelers, who were all in their own way reaching into their family archives, trying to make sense of history through a family past. And so I'm not sure if we know yet exactly what this turn is among historians, but it's to say that if you're a historian, you know, 25 years ago, that's what we said about biography, that biography wasn't history, that it was a separate genre of writing and storytelling and even of research, and it was apart from academic history. Well, I think we said that about memoir too, but here we are, and we have just Nell Irvin Painter, Deborah Gray White, Ada Ferrer, just luminaries who are all turning to their family stories. And I think we're still trying to understand or sort of have a pithy kind of explanation for what that is. But the way I see it, and I don't know about others, for me, I think this is a time in our history for really very deliberately gathering up the ancestors. I think that we need them. We need the lessons of their wisdom, but we need the lessons of their experience. We need that long view that they offer us about who we are as people, but who we are as a nation and more, about how we came to be. And so I think we're doing necessary work through this work, and it has given me a very essential sense of how we live in history. We don't just live in a moment, and our ways of being and our ways of responding to the urgencies of the present are aided by being embedded in that past. And so I hope it's a book that encourages all of us to gather up whoever our people are and wherever they are in our lives, but also in our memories and more. I think we need them right now.
I would agree. Do we have a question from the middle of the room? Because I don't want to leave this group unrepresented. If not, yes. Can we get a microphone to you to make sure the room can hear?
Thank you. I would like to return for a moment to the troublesome father of the bishop, if I may. Thank you for the encouragement that you are giving us. And by that, I mean passing on courage to those of us who have a calling we haven't fulfilled. For those of us who are part of communities of Jesuit enslavement who are doing genealogy collaboratively, sometimes we find that we are related to each other only through enslavers. And we comfort each other. As African Americans, it's not unusual for us to find the white ancestor in the closet, and it can be difficult. I'm thinking now of the numbers of Americans who have no idea that they have an African ancestor, who take that ancestry DNA test and get that surprise. They may be living in a community where someone had 1/16 African blood and legally became white, and they may never have had any idea. Do you have any words of encouragement for people who look like you and my father and my daughter, who may not know and make this awe-inspiring discovery? What would you say to the person who has the person who is accepted as being a white person, who suddenly discovers they have, you know the old expression, one in the woodpile?
First of all, thank you. Thank you so much for that, for the question, but also for letting us see a little bit of your story and adding that to the conversation tonight. It's so important for us. As I was listening to you, I was remembering someone who might be the most famous so-called mixed-race American, and that is President Obama. And I don't know if you remember, but shortly after the Obamas moved into the White House, some, I'm going to call them rogue genealogists, began to do family history research on both Mrs. Obama and President Obama. And one of the things that a genealogist presented to the president was that on his mother's side, there had been men who were slaveholders, small-scale slaveholders, but enslavers nonetheless. And I think it was a moment where what was intended was a kind of gotcha. You know, it was intended to somehow undermine him or compromise him or sully, right, his origin story. And what he said was, that is American history, right? That is who we are. And I think today, what I would say is that no longer are, you know, the fact of mixed race heritage is no longer a secret. Millions of people check all kinds of boxes every 10 years, right, to try and capture something of who they are. And as we become more visible, I'm convinced, right, that this is not a sidebar, this is not an exceptional story. And so even for folks who find out unwittingly because they treat DNA tests like a parlor game. I think some folks do it for fun. And then, oh, oops, right? That's not what I meant to discover. Even to them, I want to say, welcome to the American family, because that is one essence of the American family. And I would even go more broader to say, for some of us, this is a story about race and color. For other Americans, this is a story about mixed faith families. My mother was Catholic and my father was Methodist, and that was nearly as devastating a mix as was race in their time. We have many kinds of complex family stories that get tailored and cleaned up and told in partial ways. And so I have a dear friend who said to me, I understand your story because my mother was a Sephardic Jew and my father was an Ashkenazi Jew. And in my family, this was culture, right? That they may have shared a faith, but culturally they came from very different places. And we were a family for which that was something we had to learn and contend with and more. So I think in a gentle way, right? In a loving way, right? Not in a gotcha way, right? We can use our own stories to invite other people, right, to the big table, right? That is the table of our families. And I really do thank you so much for sharing that with all of us tonight. And thanks for being here.
Thank you both.
Martha, thank you so much. Thank you for that question. Thank you for your question, and thank you for yours as well. This book is wonderful. It's for sale in the back of the room. It is American history, as Martha says. It is a family memoir, and I recommend that you read it in community. You will find your own stories in here, even though your names of your family members may not be in the pages of the book. It will animate interesting questions. And so it's great for book clubs. It's great for families to read together. I suggest it for community reads. And I suggest that you find your way to the back of the room so you can get the book and continue this conversation with Martha. Martha, thank you so much for gracing us with this book, for your courage and your curiosity. Thanks you all for coming out this evening.